What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever time it is. Welcome back to another video with you, man, Measureaholic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another unit overview for the Divide Et Impera overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. Today we're checking out the top 8 infantry shock units in DEI. Now, before we start listing all of these units, we do need to set some ground rules. So we have 3 ground rules plus a little bit of a side thing, but we'll list the 3 ground rules first. Firstly, this is based only on the aggression based stats that these units have. This is not taking into account any of their defensive capabilities whatsoever. This is based solely on their aggression because these are shock units. Shock units are designed to deal as much damage as quickly as possible while on the charge, preferably in the rear of the enemy. They see their best usage when they're charging into the rear of the enemy, so you should always be trying to get them to do that. They are helpful in other situations, but that's going to involve way too many ifs and buts. So instead, this is basically a discussion based around shock infantry charging into the rear of the enemy, and basically how much damage will they be able to do during that encounter. And as such, I'll actually be summarizing all of the aggression based statistics for each of these units in what I'm dubbing as the aggression stat for each unit, but I'll get into a little bit more regarding that shortly. The second ground rule is that nothing from the campaign is being considered whatsoever for these units. Nothing about cost, nothing about population, nothing about where and how you get them, except for one other thing, which includes our third ground rule that we need to set, which is that this is not considered AUR and mercenary units whatsoever, except for one thing, but that unit is an honorable mention, thus it doesn't really count. But all of these units belong to the core rosters of the factions that I'll be naming alongside of them, so keep that in mind. We are not considering AUR infantry. I might do a video in the future considering it if you guys are interested, but just like the archer video that we did before where we talked about the top 5 archers, this will be the same, and we'll be talking about just the core units that belong to the following factions. So now that we've set our ground rules, we need to talk about the statistics that we'll be using. The first aggression based statistic is obviously melee attack. Now, what is melee attack? Melee attack is basically the percentage based chance of your soldier making contact with the enemy with their weapon. It is a percentage based stat. There's a lot of different factors that come into play. I'm not going to break it all down for you, but that is basically the short summary. The melee attack is basically the percentage based chance on if your unit is actually going to make contact with the enemy. The next statistic we'll be discussing is the weapon damage of the unit. This is the random chance of your weapon inflicting damage upon the enemy. However, it is random in that it has to actually also take into account the armor of the unit that you're engaging in. So basically, if your unit is attacking a unit that has an armor of 20, that unit with the armor of 20 will block any amount from 1 to 20 damage when that unit actually receives damage. So that's why weapon damage is being considered. Obviously, it's actually what's going to be killing the enemy. That's your damage. However, it is also combined with armor piercing damage. Now, armor piercing damage is a different stat entirely. It is basically a damage stat that is guaranteed to be inflicted upon the enemy. This is the damage statistic that ignores any armor whatsoever, which is why it is so vital for the shock infantry to have a high armor piercing damage, because that means that they'll be able to kill more men far faster than any other unit should be able to on the battlefield. And then the last statistic we'll be considering is the charge. The charge is basically a bonus that gets applied to the melee attack and the weapon damages of the units when they are obviously charging into the enemy. Obviously it fades away as melee combat continues after some time. So this is all based solely around the charge of your shock infantry unit hammering into hopefully the rear of the enemy unit. So that's all of our ground rules. Those are the statistics we'll be talking about and listing. If you don't agree with that, please feel free to comment down below on why. But just for the purposes of not having an infinite discussion and debate about this, I am trying to limit this to be based solely on the role that shock infantry are designed to do and conduct, which is basically to rear charge enemy formations. It's supposed to do as much damage and as much disruption as possible. And so you want them to be very high in damage very high in charge bonuses, and that you obviously want as much melee attack as possible, so they will have a good chance of actually dealing the high damage that they have behind them. Okay, so we have 8 units to discuss. However, 6 of the 8 units actually share the exact same statistics regarding all of these aggression-based stats. And as such, I will list these statistics pretty much only one time. I won't repeat it every single time, and we'll try to get through this list of 6 fairly quickly. But the bottom line thing for you to remember is that the following 6 units all tie for a 3rd best shock infantry unit in the game when we just consider these statistics. Now, you can break things down further, but again, that's where you're going to get involved in an endless discussion almost. But I'm not here to do that. I'm here to just focus on what I've already said that I'm here to focus on. So anyway, let's get into the list. Now, the first out of these 6 units we're listing here is the Sword Masters. Now, this unit belongs to the Caledonians, the Irish faction you can play as, and as the Iceni. It is shared between all 3 factions, and it also has these exact same statistics between all 3 of the factions, which is why I've just clumped it all into being listed as part of each of these factions. Now, their statistics, which I'll list once, but they will be the same for the following 5 units after this, is a melee attack of 17, a weapon damage of 25, an armor piercing damage of 13, and a charge bonus of 36, coming to a total aggression based stat of 91. That is friggin' fantastic. They are excellent units, as are all of the units on this list, so I'll try not to repeat that too much. But that is their statistics. They have 200 men per unit, as do all of the units in this list. They all consist of 200 men, except for 1 unit, but that unit is an honorable mention, so we won't even get too much into that. But that is our first unit in the list. Now, the next unit is the Celtic Sword Masters from the Boii, or the Boy, however you want to pronounce them. I pronounce it Boii, but I'm sure that's wrong somewhere in the world. But anyway, the Celtic Sword Masters belong only to the Boii. They have the exact same statistics as the Sword Masters, and they don't belong to any other faction, but they are a different unit in their looks and in their names, so hence why I'm listing them separately, even though they're almost the exact same kind of unit, really. Well, they pretty much are. But that is the second out of these 6 units that we'll be listing here. The third one that we'll be listing is the Thracian Late Rumfire Warriors. We're traveling over to Thracia now. These guys also share the exact same aggression-based statistics, and they belong to the Adrician Kingdom. Fantastic unit. It is worth noting that they do have a mercenary variant that you can recruit with this unit, so that's worth noting, but I won't discuss that because, like I said, we're not talking about AOR mercenary units. I just thought I'd throw that little fact out there for you. Moving away from Thrace, though, we charge all the way over to India, or at least the fringes of India. The Mauryan Kingdom has the Mauryan Warrior Guildsmen in this list. Again, they share the exact same statistics as the aforementioned units, and as such, they will be tying for 3rd place in this list. Fantastic looking unit overall. You'll be using these units a lot throughout your campaign as the Mauryans. Then we scoot on down the Indian Ocean, down to North Africa, where we encounter the Midewi, and the Midewi are presenting the Ethiopian Axemen. Again, with just 200 men per unit, exact same statistics as I listed before regarding aggression, which places them as being tied for number 3 regarding the best shock infantry in the game. Fantastic unit overall. Again, you'll also be using these guys a lot in your campaigns as a Midewi. Fantastic unit, highly recommend you use them when possible. And then the last of the 6 units that we need to list here is the Lusitani Bear Warriors. They are the only Iberian faction to have such incredible shock units, unfortunately, but as such, they are the only Iberian nation listed in this video, so hats off to the Iberians. They are finally getting involved in these videos, although I guess this is technically only our 2nd unit overview video. But anyway, little round of applause for the Lusitani getting involved. Again, exact same statistics as the aforementioned units. However, now that we've mentioned the 6 units that I wanted to, all of those 6 units tie for 3rd place, so I'll just repeat their names very quickly. You have the Sword Masters of the Caledonian, the Irish, and the Iceni. You have the Celtic Sword Masters of the Boii. You have the Thracian Late Rumfire Warriors from the Adrician Kingdom. Then you also have the Mauryan Warrior Guildsmen from Moria, or the Mauryans. You also have the Ethiopian Axemen from the Midewi, the Lusitani Bear Warriors from, surprise surprise, the Lusitani. However, now we get into the top 2 best shock infantry units that there are left. But before we get to them, I do want to throw in our honorable mention. And our honorable mention is the Sogdian Axemen, which is an AOR unit. They are instantly made available to the Bactrians, and I'm keeping them in this list, or at least as an honorable mention, because they were actually originally in this list as being tied for 3rd place with all of these other units. Even though they're an AOR unit, I still felt they were so powerful because not only did they share the exact same statistics as these others, but they actually had 300 men in their unit, which makes them possibly, not certainly, but possibly even more valuable than these guys. However, in the most latest hotfix for the 1.2.7 patch, which takes us up to patch B, which was released on the 25th of March 2021, in case you're watching this far off in the future somehow, the Sogdian Axemen were nerfed. F's in the chat for the Sogdian Axemen, although they're not terrible now, but comparing the total aggression stats of the previous units I mentioned being at 91, the Sogdian Axemen are way down to 85. They were previously 91, but now they're at 90. Now they're at 85. Sorry. They have a melee attack of 15, a weapon damage at 25, so the same as the rest of the units. However, their armor penetration is down to 11. Charge bonus of 34, so all of their stats are lower except the weapon damage, which basically really hurts the total aggression stat. Still a fantastic unit if you can get them whenever you're playing as a faction in the area, such as Parthia or the Bactrians, but since they are an AOR unit and they've actually now been nerfed to not even be on the same level as these units, they're now kicked out of the top 8 shock units, or what would have been the top 9 shock units. But anyway, now let's move on to the top 2 shock infantry units in DEI. So ladies and gentlemen, drum roll please for the number 2 shock infantry unit in DEI, which is a little bit debatable, and I'll talk about why in a second, but in my opinion it is the noble late Rumfire warriors from the Odrysian Kingdom. They are coming in with a whopping 18 melee attack, at 25 weapon damage, 13 armor piercing damage, and a charge bonus of 38, giving a total aggression stat of 94. 3 higher than all of the other units we've discussed besides Sogdians. Fantastic infantry shock unit, and they have the highest melee attack out of all of the units in this list. And arguably they could be in the number 1 slot. I'm sure there'll be some comments talking about why they should be or shouldn't be, so please let me know down below. But in my opinion, the number 1, the best of the best, the most impressive, the most dedicated, most efficient, maybe not most efficient, but the best infantry shock unit in DEI is the Mauryan Elite Macemen, belonging to, of course, the Mauryans, or the Indian Kingdom that you can play in DEI, which is very surprising because their statistics are actually a little bit lower. At least some of them are, and so this is going to mess with some people, but please hear me out before you comment and dislike the video and call me an idiot for listing these units in the order I am. But in my opinion, they're the best for a couple of reasons, but we'll get to that shortly. So the first thing we have to list is their melee attack. Now this is going to make you laugh, but they actually have the lowest melee attack out of all of the units on this list, and that also includes the Sogdian Axemen. The Mauryans only have a melee attack of 14. The Sogdian Axemen have a melee attack of 15. So immediately I'm already looking like an idiot, right? In addition, their weapon damage is at 22. Every single other unit we've discussed has a weapon damage of 25. So they're 3 lower than every single other unit. So already they're really suffering, right? These guys are... It seems like they're not even going to make the list for top shock infantry units. However, things take a massive 180 where they get an armor penetration damage of 20. 2-0, Sunny Jim. An armor piercing damage of 20. That is friggin' insane. It's out of this world. It is way higher than any other unit on this list, including the noble Thracian units. The noble Thracian unit that I listed has an armor piercing damage of just 13, which means that they're only guaranteed 13 damage to a unit, whereas the Mauryan Elite Macemen are guaranteed 20. Now that is a whopping difference, and not only do they have a higher armor piercing damage, but they actually slightly have a higher charge bonus at 38, giving their total aggression stat being at 94. So it actually equals out to being the exact same as the noble Thracian shock infantry units. The Rumfire Warriors, they're a fantastic unit, don't get me wrong. It's arguable that they could be put in the number 1 slot. However, you do need to consider what these statistics actually mean. The melee attack is just a chance that your infantry unit is going to make contact with the enemy. So 14 is still very, very good, but it's not as good as some of these. So that is a negative point for the Mauryan Elite Macemen. In addition, you have the weapon damage, which is, again, the chance of damage that could occur against the enemy unit. It is not guaranteed whatsoever. However, you then have the armor-piercing damage of the Mauryan Elite Macemen being at 20. That is absolutely guaranteed as long as they do make contact with the enemy, in that their weapons make contact with the enemy. They get a successful hit. 20 damage is guaranteed abso-friggin-lutely. On top of that, you then apply a 38 charge bonus to that damage, and then things get out of control very, very quickly. Not to say that the Thracian late nobles are not impressive, they are incredibly impressive, but I personally prefer having the higher damage potential. If you combine the statistics of the noble late Rumfire Warriors, you have a weapon damage being at 38 in total, whereas the Mauryan Elite Macemen have a weapon damage total, combining the weapon damage and armor piercing, of 42. That's actually quite significant in their difference. And then you also had the charge bonus to add in a little bit of extra punch behind that. So I'm sure there'll be quite a few comments to discuss the noble late Rumfire Warriors versus the Mauryan Elite Macemen. Please feel free to chip in. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think I'm terribly wrong about it? What do you prefer? Do you prefer having a higher damage potential, or do you prefer having a higher chance to hit the enemy, even though your damage is going to be fairly significantly lower than what it could be for a different unit? It's a hard gamble to pull off, but in my opinion, I would take the Elite Macemen pretty much any day of the week. Probably 9 times out of 10 I would take the Mauryan Elite Macemen. And they're just a more unique unit anyway, so I love the Mauryan faction. They're really, really awesome in DI, so that's a little bit of bias coming in as well. But these statistics don't lie, so there they are for you. Again, the statistics may change in the future if you're watching this far later on. DEI does get updates all the time. Unit statistics get adjusted. In the most recent 1.2.7 patch, Shock Infantry actually got a little bit of an overhaul applied to them all, so that's why I've been waiting so long to do this video. I got delayed because of that, and then some other statistic changes that came out for the Sogdians. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to say. That is your top 8 Shock Infantry units in DEI for the core military rosters of all of these factions. Again, not taking into account AOR units or any campaign factors whatsoever. If we do take other factors into account, I'm sure this list would change quite dramatically, but for the sake of argument, I'm ignoring that. But basically, I'm theorizing that this is a best case scenario and all of these units are on the same playing field, except for their aggression-based statistics. So hopefully you guys understand why I did what I did. I'll continue to do the same for future unit overview videos I conduct, just to make things easier so we don't end up in a nearly infinite debate. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.